Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Midtown Scholar Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Alex Brubaker. I'm the manager here at the Scholar. And as always, I am live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at the bookstore. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for a much anticipated discussion with Lara Prescott and Hazel Gaynor. Before we get started this evening, I'd like to make just a brief announcement, and that is that we are switching live stream platforms. Tonight's event will be our last event with Crowdcast, and we are switching everything over to Zoom from here on out. It's really easy to learn. Most of you are probably using it already, and we will continue to stream these events on Facebook Live as well. So this Thursday will be our first event with Zoom. It's going to be with author Phuc Tran, who will be discussing his new memoir about growing up in central Pennsylvania. The book is called Saigon, and it will be this Thursday, 7 o'clock. It's going to be a good one, so make sure to sign up through our website or Facebook page. But now, on to our event tonight. I am honored to introduce our authors this evening, Lara Prescott and Hazel Gaynor. Hazel is an award-winning New York Times, USA Today, Irish Times, and international best-selling author. She is the author of A Girl Who Came Home, a novel of the Titanic, A Memory of Violets, The Girl from the Savoy, The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter, and Meet Me in Monaco. I have to give just a quick plug to Hazel here, who was really kind enough to join us for this interview. She has a new historical novel coming out this October. It's titled When We Were Young and Brave, and it's set in northern China during World War II. Check it out from your local indie, pre-order it, and maybe we'll be lucky enough to host Hazel this fall once again. Our featured author this evening is, of course, Lara Prescott. She received her MFA from the Michener Center for Writers at the University of Texas. She studied political science at American University in Washington, D.C., and international development in Namibia and South Africa. Prior to writing fiction, Lara worked as a political campaign consultant, and her writing has appeared in the Southern Review, the Hudson Review, Crazy Horse, and more. She lives in Austin, Texas. Of course, the book we are here for this evening is titled The Secrets We Kept. Here it is, which was an instant New York Times bestseller and a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. It is now available in paperback. Here it is. So I'd like to encourage you, if you haven't yet done so, to purchase the book. If you click the green button, it's below my face, right here, that'll take you to our website to purchase a copy of the book. And if you're on Facebook Live or YouTube Live, simply head to our website at midtownscholar.com. And thank you for your support. But now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming onto the screen Lara Prescott and Hazel Gaynor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. What a good
wonderful interview. You can intro us anywhere we go, Alex. That was fabulous. Thank you. We're so thrilled to join you all tonight. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Lara, I'm so excited to interview you. I have been dying to talk to you about this incredible book. And I'm sure that we're going to have a really interesting discussion. I have loads of questions, and I hope the people listening have loads of questions as well. So please do add them into the screen, and we'll leave time at the end for answering some of those questions. So fire away, and Alex will keep an eye on them. And Lara, I'm going to just hand over to you briefly. I think you just wanted to say hi, tell us a little bit about the book, and maybe do a short reading, and then we'll get into some questions from there. So over to you.
Oh, thank you, Hazel. I'm so happy to be chatting with you. I am such a fan of yours, and I'm so excited for your new book to come out in October. And so everyone, definitely pre-order it now if you can. So yes, my book is called The Secrets We Kept. I have the nice paperback here.
And I have the different paperback here.
That's the UK paperback. I love that cover. I think it's so gorgeous. Pretty.
And that cover you have is just divine. That dress, I want to wear it and drink cocktails all day.
I know, and I actually have a cocktail with me for
so
the
do
event.
I.
Yeah. Cheers to you.
Cheers.
But anyway, so yes, I'm live from my little shed in Austin, Texas, here to chat with everyone about my book. The Secrets We Kept was inspired by the true story behind Doctor Zhivago and its publication, and how the CIA used it as a weapon during the Cold War. But really, I focus on the stories of women, the CIA typists being the anchor of half of my story, and women who, from previous historical records, have kind of been left out of the story. And then on the Eastern side, I talk about Olga Ivanskaya, who was Boris Pasternak's real life mistress and muse. So I kind of go back and forth across the world and have a polyphonic novel of different voices, but most of them are anchored by women. And the first voice that came to me during this writing of it, during the first draft, in fact, I was doing research by looking up all the CIA records and all these reports and memos that the CIA released in 2014. And I was reading them. There's about 100, and you can still check them out if you want to on the CIA's website. And I kept thinking, who were the people that type these documents, because much of the documents are redacted of names and some of the details. And I kept thinking, I need to do research about who these people were. And it turns out there was a group of CIA women who were recruited as typists. And I just became obsessed with this CIA typing pool. And I fictionalize it at the start of the book. And I'm going to just read just a minute or so of that first voice that came to me. And the first sentence of this prologue of my novel actually was something that I emailed myself in the middle of the night when I kind of got this strange chorus voice in my head. And it's the first thing that I wrote, and it's still in the novel. So you never know. Listen to the voices sometimes.
Absolutely.
Sometimes they're trash. You don't have to listen to them all, but this one,
we don't listen to those ones.
Yes. So I'm going to read just a bit of the beginning of the novel. So you don't have to know much, except that this is set in 1958. This is a group of CIA typists. We typed 100 words per minute and never missed a syllable. Our identical desks were each equipped with a mid-shell Royal Quiet Deluxe typewriter, a black Western Electric rotary phone, and a stack of yellow steno pads. Our fingers flew across the keys. Our clacking was constant. We'd pause only to answer the phone or to take a drag of a cigarette. Some of us managed to master both without missing a beat. The men would arrive around 10. One by one, they'd pull us into their offices. We'd sit in small chairs pushed into the corners while they'd sit behind their large mahogany desks or pace the carpet while speaking to the ceiling. We'd listen. We'd record. We were their audience of one for their memos, reports, write-ups, lunch orders. Sometimes they'd forget we were there, and we'd learn much more. Who was trying to box out whom? Who was making a power play? Who was having an affair? Who was in and who was out? Sometimes they would refer to us not by name, but by hair color or body type. Blondie, red, tits. We had our secret names for them too. Grabber, coffee breath, teeth. They would call us girls, but we were not. So that's all I'll read, just a snippet from the prologue.
I want you to read on.
They're kind of like this Greek chorus that almost anchor the novel. They bookmark them, or I always say this wrong. So they bookend the novel in the beginning and the end, and they chime in with the secrets they know that's going on and what they think is happening with the mission. And it was really fun to write.
It's a fascinating device, and it's really interesting to hear you describe them as like the Greek chorus, because I thought of the typist as exactly like that, like the narrator in a Shakespeare play who steps onto the stage every now and again to sort of, bring us forward into what's coming next. And from the get-go, and it's so interesting to hear that was the very first thing you wrote, and it stayed, because so often the very first thing we write ends up in the trash. So that's fabulous that voice came to you obviously so clearly, and I want to talk to you a lot more about that, because this is, and it's hard to believe actually that this is your debut novel. It's so accomplished, your writing is so confident, and so it immerses you completely, and that's not an easy thing to do, and I'm envious of that and the voices that you have. So if anybody hasn't picked up the book and enjoyed it yet, then I'd encourage them to. And I want to start really by asking you about your first interest in Doctor Zhivago, which has such a pivotal role in this book. And you're named Lara, I believe, after the heroine in Zhivago. So this was obviously in the stars, it was meant to be. So when did you first, what point in your life did you first discover that classic? And then how does the reading of a classic like that springboard to your inspiration for a debut novel. So if you can just give us a little bit of your sort of love affair with that novel and how it's led to your novel.
Yes. So yes, I was named Lara after the heroine in Doctor Zhivago, and it was my mother's favorite film, the 1965 David Lean film, and her favorite book. And as a little girl, she had this jewelry box that played Lara's theme, which is in the movie, and I would always wind it up again and again because I was so struck by the beautiful images that I saw while watching the film. But it wasn't really until I was in high school that I actually took on Dr. Zhivago, which I was in my Russian literature phase that every, high school girl starts getting into. I was reading Anna Karenina and all of these classics. And I thought, I need to read Dr. Zhivago for myself. I need to see what I was named after and why. And so I picked up the book, and it was something that I became entranced with from the get-go. It was one of those books that is almost a touchstone book where I'd read it every few years and get something different from it every time I would read it. And so in high school, I was obsessed with the love story and between Yuri and Lara. And when I moved to Washington, D.C., and I pursued a career in politics, I worked on campaigns for a few years. I was really interested in this almost why it was deemed subversive from the Soviet state to actually ban the book, because that was something a lot of people don't know, that this was banned in the country it was written, even though it was available throughout the rest of the world. So I was so intrigued by that, what makes a banned book? What were they keeping from the citizens? And, a few years after that, I started studying to become a writer, and I was reading it again and just struck by Boris's sentences on the poetic level and just the beauty of it. But in 2014, so flash forward, I'm trying to become a writer. I have a novel in the drawer that didn't work out. I'm applying to MFA programs, and my father sends me this article from the Washington Post, and the Washington Post reporters had petitioned the government to release these documents related to their mission about Dr. Zhivago and how the CIA had used it as a weapon. And I was so struck with the idea that this work of literature that I was so close to was used not only, by the CIA, but became this whole crazy, almost stranger than fiction mission. I had to find out everything I could about it. And that's when I started doing a lot of research into, the CIA archives, but then learning more about Boris Pasternak and Olga, and almost a year of research before I started writing in 2015. And it's just like all these things. Yeah, all these passions, come together in strange ways.
And I firmly believe that, we're often, as writers, we're often asked about where did you get the idea? Where was the inspiration? And I really believe that the idea finds the writer. And I think there are so many ideas whirling around, and potentially lots of writers could write that book, but I really believe that the book finds the right person to write that story. And this was obviously in your DNA, and your parents have a lot to answer for in your for, the name and the article. And it's a fascinating backdrop to then this phenomenally successful novel that revolves around another phenomenally successful novel. And as you said, I don't think many people know the history to that it wasn't published first in Russia, and the connections to the CIA. So that, to me, when I first started to read the novel, it just drew me in so much, because I was learning something. I was being educated about this classic book and the danger surrounding it, which I didn't know about. So thank you for that. So tell us about your research, because you have two parts to this book, and I think both of them have sort of, one has played on part of your own previous job, as you said, in DC, and then we have Russia. And I'm fascinated to know how you went and researched in Russia, how difficult or easy that was, how much you knew about the culture beforehand. So just tell us a little bit about that process of being in a place and how that informed your writing of that place.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I lived in DC for a number of years. So in my head, I have this map of DC. I know what it feels like to be there and to walk in the streets. And many of the places that I mention in the book are still there. And I had had frequented them many times, like the Mayflower Hotel or the National Cathedral. I had a feel for the place, which I think is so important when writing a book, especially historical fiction, is to capture that essence of a place. And so I had never been to Russia before. So I knew during the first draft while I was writing this, I started, how scrimping together money so I could go to Russia with my husband. And we went, and it's something that, I had this very, very difficult time kind of figuring out exactly how to get around and where I was going and what I should do. But as soon as I went to Perodalkina, which is where Boris Pasternak lived and where Olga lived, just 20-minute walk away, and as soon as I stepped off the train there and walked up the hill, it felt like I was going back in time. You see the cemetery in the woods where he is buried, you see the church on the hill, the creek where he walked past, and much of it is still the same as when he walked that same route. And it was such a, impactful moment, in addition to all of the books and articles and archival footage and photographs and everything that I had already done. It's a different impact when you're actually walking in that place. And I think that it's essential. And I think whatever books I write next, going to the place and seeing it for myself is something that I think I would, once all of COVID is over and it is safe, I think that's exactly what I'll be doing for this next book. But it's
amazing, isn't it? How it gives you that extra layer of just the sense of a place, the geography, the sounds, the smells. It can really enrich the sense of place for the reader, hopefully. And I think that clearly comes through. I was fascinated to know if you had been to Russia, because I think it screams off the page that you know this place. And how did you know these places?
And not only another twist of fate happened to me. So I went to an MFA program here in Texas, and there's only 12 people in your cohort, so it's a very small program. And several members of that cohort were from former Soviet countries and spoke fluent Russian. And so I have friends who were really advising me on very small things about what I was getting right, what I was getting wrong. And that was really invaluable, and kind of this just go to, is this attitude right? Is this food cooked right? Just little details, they were there to help me. And that's, part of it, that finding those experts and people that can speak to their own experience is really essential. But the research is so fun. It's something that you really, as a historical writer, you just really live for, and it really fuels your imagination. And you really want to capture, that time period, but also imagine what it was like to be in those people's shoes, which is why it makes for good fiction.
Absolutely. And, you can, we're always trying to wear our research very lightly on the page. Mm-hmm. So, hours and hours of research may become a paragraph in the book. It's almost as much what you leave out, isn't it, as what you put in. And the reader should never be aware, oh, look, she did her research. It's just an organic thing. And it really is apparent in The Secrets We Kept that you inhabited those places and your characters. And I just wondered, was Pasternak a difficult person? Was his life and his affair with his mistress, was it difficult to get information on that, or were you inundated with information and trying to reduce it down? It's either one, or feast or famine, isn't it, with research?
Yeah, I think with Boris, there is a plethora of books written about Boris, both in the letters he wrote himself, his own writing, but also so many book after book of people writing about him. I think the trickier part was finding information about Olga, and Olga Ivanskaya left behind her own story, which was so invaluable to my research. She wrote about her experiences with Boris, which became just like really constant book in my life that I kept wanting to find out more and more about her. But unfortunately, her history hasn't been as open, and the connection with Pasternak hasn't been as embraced as it should be, because she certainly was more than just a muse for him. She was almost a business manager and a confidant, and she was more than just the younger lover. So it is what you were saying interesting. You learn so much about these people, but you don't want to have this, and you're not writing a nonfiction book, you're writing fiction, and you don't want to have a Wikipedia entry, let me explain to you this and this and this and this, because it's just not why people read fiction. You would read fiction because you're just being placed there. You're not, and hopefully, I do love it when people want to learn the real story or find out what was fact in fiction. I think that's the great thing about films that are based on, real events or books. You want to find out more, but the trick is what you do brilliantly is to kind of know so much that you can just inhabit it.
Yeah, that's the trick, isn't it? Always that it's not, as you say, it's not apparent that all of this research went on. It just becomes a part of the reading experience. And the women in particular, I thought that was really fascinating. That obviously we have this incredibly famous novel written by a man, and yet it was the women and the woman in his life who you found a muse of your own, if you like, to tell this story. And the women's voices, and there are many of them. Did you find anything particularly unexpected when you were researching the women connected to the CIA and to this whole event around the Zhivago novel? Was there something shocking, or what was it that really leapt out to you, and how much was fact and how much was fiction in the characters in the novel?
Definitely so many things shocked me, because I learned about these hidden figures, if you so to speak, of the early days of the CIA. And the character of Sally, for instance, she was really based on kind of a bunch of different real life heroes of World War II that later went on to work at the CIA, people like Virginia Hall and Betty McIntosh. And I was struck, why I was so shocked about learning their stories was that I couldn't believe they weren't something that I already knew about or taught to me, in school. It was, unfathomable that these women don't have monuments already built to them. And you learn about Virginia Hall, and she was leading French resistance fighters up to the, across battle lines and in parachuting into places, and women were blowing up trains, and it's just doing extraordinary work alongside of the same men who would later found the CIA. Yet when the war ends, they're kind of put back in their place and said, your job is, as a secretary or in the records department or personnel, or you really can't advance beyond that. I mean, occasionally some women did if they were given special privileges or special assignments, which is what I explore in the characters of Sally and Irina, who may have inhabited one role, but they were doing other work, as well.
Yeah, I just think it's so often the case, isn't it, that we know about an event from the male point of view, and there are so many other. It's not just telling the women's story; it's that there are so many other aspects to that story that we don't see by just focusing on the male piece of history. And I always find it incredible that there are all these, as you say, hidden figures that we need to know more about. And I think we're living through an amazing time to be a historical novelist, because we're so open to these stories. We want to hear new voices. We want to see things from a different point of view. And I think it's a fascinating time to be writing history as we're living through history.
That is so true, because more and more of these stories are coming out. Last year, a book about Virginia Hall called A Woman of No Importance came out, and all of these fiction and nonfiction stories are now being told. And because there's an appetite for them, people want to read those stories. We want to find that out. And it's something that publishing is now catching on to. It's like, yes, give us these stories.
Absolutely.
So it is so exciting. I think it's a moment. These last even 5 years, you see more and more of it.
Yeah, and long may it last. I think there's so many, people often, I'm sure you get asked as well, do you worry about running out of ideas? And I'm like, look at history. There are so many stories. I'm worried about running out of time. I'm not running out of ideas.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's something, when I found out I was selected for Reese's book club, that she has taken on herself to tell these stories, and she is this advocate for women storytellers and women's stories, which is puts it on this other platform. And I think she's helped really raise the level and appetite for this. And there's so much to dig into. I mean, I feel the same way. I don't think the ideas could ever run dry.
Let's hope not. Fantastic.
Yes.
And tell us
Yeah.
tell us about the Reese Witherspoon book club cake, because this is so thrilling, and I can't even imagine how. Tell us how that happened, because I think we all love to hear these stories of where were you then. So when did you get that phone call, and how many glasses of champagne did you drink immediately?
I was actually exercising. I was on my exercise bike, and I got a call from New York, and I just let it go to voicemail, but then it called again, and I was like, oh no, something's wrong. Is this because I knew it was it had to be someone in publishing, because I it was a New York number, and I was worried that something was wrong with the book, or it's like put on hold, or who knows what. And then my editor told me that Reese had picked it for her book club, which I didn't even know it had been submitted. This is all going on. The business side of things goes on behind the scenes, but it was so crazy because I was so excited, and they told me I can't tell anyone. I could tell my husband, but I couldn't really tell anyone else. I ran outside. My husband, I don't know what he was doing, he was doing something in the backyard. I started screaming, and then we definitely went out for drinks. There's a bar here in Austin called Kitty Cohen's, and they have a Dr. Zhivago drink.
Oh, we knew this was all meant to be. It was all.
So I had to go there to toast. It's like a Moscow Mule kind of drink. So we went there and toasted.
And I think sometimes we hear about something like being chosen for Reese Witherspoon, and this book was such an instant hit, and yet this doesn't happen overnight, and I'm sure that you, like many authors, have gone through lots of disappointments and lots of rejections or things not going so well. So how did you keep going? You've talked about having the idea for this book, and you've obviously done a huge amount of research. You didn't know yet that all this was coming. So when you're sitting staring at the page, tell us a little bit about your own motivation, and a little bit about how you write, where you write. How did you keep putting the words on the page? Because that's not easy.
Yeah. And I do think, when people hear of a new writer, they think, this all happened overnight. But for sure, I had another career before I turned my head towards writing. But when I was a little girl, that was always my dream, is to be a novelist. And somewhere along the way, I started thinking that's just not an achievable dream for me. And I went to work for nonprofits and political campaigns, but I kind of got pulled back into my passion and knew that I had to make a go with it. It was something that was in me. And I think many writers feel the same. It's you really don't have a choice not to do it. It's something in you. It's hard to describe, because so much of the time writing is not a pleasant experience, at least not for me. It can be a great experience when it's going well, but so many days of not being able to get it right, or throwing so much work out that you've written, it's hard. And it's also hard to face rejection. I have that novel that I wrote that never showed anyone because I thought it was so terrible. And I applied for, MFA programs and didn't get in my first year round, and had to keep going. And there's so many doubts that come up where you think, I don't have what it takes. But another writer gave me this advice when I started studying at University of Texas, and she said, all of you here, have this raw talent, but really the work is what will set you apart. And the work, even through hardships of not knowing if it will ever be published, and you just keep going. And sorry, for some reason my thing went blank, but it's back. Can you
We still have you? Yeah, you're still here.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened. I'm plugged in. Okay. But yeah, so keep going, facing the rejections, don't letting them get to you, don't let naysayers get to you, and just keep going until you have something you're proud of. And that's really all you can ask. Like, the success isn't something you can ever predict, and certainly nothing I could predict. I think the only thing you can predict is if you put your heart and soul into a book and hopefully someone else will read it. And the rest of it, there's chance, there's all kinds of factors that go into getting picked for reads and things like that. I think that you can't really concentrate on or count on.
Yeah,
It's more,
absolutely.
yeah, and it's something that I constantly remind yourself. You start a new book and you're filled with doubts again. And I think I asked a writer friend who has multiple books out, and he said, yeah, that will always be there. So you'll always think you don't know.
Never goes away.
So
I know I'm just starting my week, and I'm still wrecked with self-doubt, imposter syndrome. So I think you need that. I think
it helps.
I think to say you can't, if you don't have that and you sit down, I think something's gone a bit wrong.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to ask a couple more short questions, and then we might turn to any questions from the audience. So one of the things that I love about the description of The Secrets We Kept, and it's a line that I've pulled out, it says, "At the center of this novel is the powerful belief that a piece of art can change the world." Given what we're living through at the moment, and how disrupted all our lives have become, do you think that still holds true, that something like a novel or some other piece of art can have an effect on us the same way Dr. Zhivago had in its time? Or are we just living in a different time? I just think it's a really fascinating premise.
Yeah. I think that, whether or not a government is going to use a book against another government, that's to be determined. But on an individual basis, I think I wouldn't be a writer if I didn't think books can change lives. And when I first read a book that didn't have a happy ending, or that took me to a place that I had no idea existed, it changed the course of my life. I knew that I wanted to write about those hidden stories. I knew I wanted to become a writer and have that effect on someone who's reading it. And that builds up over time. I think right now we're living through this time period where, for me, books are one of the only sources of connection that I feel to the outside world. I think many people are turning to books during this time because we want to get out of our homes. We want to see the world. We want to see other people's experiences and learn from them and learn about our country. And you see, these rising movements like Black Lives Matter, and how connected, people are buying more and more books and learning about themselves. And I think books still have that power that's really unique to them because you spend so much time with it. It's in your head and it transports you. And I think any good art still has, that capability to change the world. And certainly governments still fear books because books are being banned all over the world, and that hasn't ended. It might not be as extreme here in the United States, but it's still prevalent.
Absolutely. And isn't it interesting how history does repeat itself, and I firmly believe, we are writing about these historic events, and yet here we are living through a historic event. This is, unprecedented in our lifetime, in our generation. And, who's going to write our story, I wonder, and all that's happening here. So I think it's incredible that a lot of people have turned to their escape from this pandemic is other people's imaginations and other people's words. And I have found, though, myself, I found it difficult. My attention span wavers desperately. Have you found that? Have you found it difficult to read and write, actually? Has it affected you that way?
I think especially in the beginning, back in March, I really couldn't even sit down and read for a time because my mind was just overloaded with the news, and I was going on Twitter too much, things like that, and I just couldn't concentrate. I think I'm now getting back into the rhythm, this summer, of being able to, immerse myself in a book, and it's such a relief. And not only is, what you said before, history informs so much of the present. So I always think, if you know your history, things aren't that big of a surprise when they happen. And, I talked to family members who are like, can you believe this is happening? I was like, actually, it's shocking that it's happening, but you can see the through lines to history that led to this event. So it really helps inform you. I think writing has also been tricky because I have a 4-month-old at home. So I had this double whammy of my routine being changed. but I've finally gotten back into the groove of research and writing, and that's been such a relief as well.
That's not easy. That's amazing. Yeah, hang in there.
We'll
It gets
see
easier.
We'll see if it's, yeah.
I have 2 teenagers now. I'm not sure it does get any easier, actually.
Oh, I know. My gosh, it's
But it's
so
great to
hard.
hear that you're writing again. That's what we want to hear. Are you
At least
working
in the
on
morning.
something? Yeah, we'll keep writing. Are you writing something that we'll have soon, or what's next? And then we'll hand over and answer some of the questions.
I don't know about when, as soon as I can manage it, but I'm still on the first draft. But I'm interested in the 1930s. I'm interested in Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from, Pittsburgh specifically, and I'm really immersed in the Great Depression and in Pittsburgh and all kinds of things that are really close to my heart because I'm from there. My family's from there.
Fantastic.
So
More to come, as they say.
More to come.
Write faster.
Okay, so to all our viewers out there, if you'd like to purchase The Secrets We Kept, green button below all of our faces here, click that. It'll head to our website. Thank you so much, Hazel and Lara, for this wonderful conversation. Now we'd like to turn it over to our audience. So if you have a question for Lara or Hazel, there's a button below that says Ask a Question. Hit that, submit your question. We've already got a bunch here, some really good questions for our authors here. So we'll just dive right in. Sarah asks, the book jumps around among various perspectives and the reader is not told from whom the perspective is from, which was very interesting. Why did you choose to write that way? So formatting question.
Yeah, I'm really interested in structure, and I love reading polyphonic novels where the narrative does jump around from different perspectives and different places. I think it's interesting when looking at an event, a historical event in particular, because it gives you different angles into that event. And, one person's memory is not always the other person's memory. And so I was playing around with that, especially dealing with the CIA and their version of events versus, the version that's going on in the East. And I had fun playing around with, I don't know, like if I can hold this up and show, but the titles of each chapter has almost the role of the person who is narrating. And so it has the typist in the beginning. And then as I keep going on, that those become crossed out as people's roles change over time. So someone like Olga in the book starts off as the muse, but then she ends up as the almost widow. And so you see this transition. So there's a hint there, but it's not so obvious all the time.
So this next question is for both authors. This one's from Elizabeth. They ask, how do you name your characters? So Lara, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Hazel.
So for my fictional characters, some of them actually ended up, and I do little secret nods to people. Some of them are named after my great aunts and people of that era that are names that I really enjoy. So, Sally, and such. It is difficult because I'm currently doing that right now, and I'm looking to see what names were most popular for Irish descendants in Pittsburgh in the 1930s, and you look at that and often it's just something that grabs you, or you have some sort of personal connection with it. And then the historical figures are named as they are.
And I think it's interesting because sometimes the names that you have to work with can determine what options you have for other names, right? Because you can't have lots of names all beginning with the same letter. So I do exactly the same as you, Lara. So I picked from family history and those lovely lost names that we don't often use anymore. So I've used a couple of family members. I've used names of old friends I used to live with, just names that seem to suit a character as well. I don't often change a name, actually. In a first draft, once somebody has a name, that's it, they're stuck.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
This next question is, again, for both authors. Since you both write historical fiction, Elizabeth wants to know, do you always visit places you put in your books? So, Lara, again, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Hazel.
So when I was writing this book, I tried to, but my bank account didn't allow me to go everywhere that Dr. Zhivago travels to. So most of my budget at the time was spent going to Russia, which was a big trip for me and my husband. But I didn't end up going to Italy at the time, which when I went on tour in Italy for my book, when it was published in Italian, they said, did you visit here? You got so much correct. And I was so happy because I didn't get to visit there before the book came out. But I think with the next one, I definitely will try to set aside time and energy to go to all of those places.
Same. And I think whenever, as you said, Lara, whenever you can, it makes such a difference. And lots of my novels have been based in parts of England that I grew up in. So The Lighthouse Keeper's Daughter, for example, I'm very familiar with the northeast of England, and I actually went out to Grace Darling's lighthouse, and that really, really helped write those scenes. And of course, when I wrote Meet Me in Monaco, I had to go to Monaco. My husband thinks I choose my books very wisely, depending on where I need to travel. But my new book, We Were Young and Brave, is set, as you said, in China, in World War II. And I haven't been to China and would absolutely love to. And funnily enough, my husband went to China with work whilst I was writing the novel. So yeah, I tried to sneak into his suitcase, but it didn't work. But it's sometimes not practical, especially with family. But I think we research as widely as we can from reading about a place and trying to understand it, even if you can't step feet on the ground. And I think we're going to have to maybe do that more.
Yeah,
more at the moment, unfortunately. But it really does help.
I was thinking the same thing of how this even changes my own plans of what I'm writing, and like, when am I going to be able to go somewhere and go back to these places? But I will say, archival photographs, even if there's, historical film, those really help set a, and you'll find these websites dedicated to the most niche subjects. Like I found a website that was just a streetcar going around Washington, D.C. in the 50s. And that was so helpful for me to see what the streets were like and how different they were. So you can still find a sense of place from those things too.
Yeah, the photographs and letters, people were very descriptive in their writing. So
yeah,
I read a lot of diaries of the teachers in the school that was interned that I write about in When We Were Young and Brave, and their description of weather, of the landscape, of what people were eating and wearing was so rich. So you can get an awful lot from the people's thoughts at the time, from when and where they were.
This next question is from another Sarah. They ask, Lara, as a debut, what was your favorite part of the publication process, and how did your expectations line up with reality?
Favorite part of the publication process was definitely, this is hard. I think when I actually saw the book, for the first time, and they sent you, your hardbacks, it was the best moment. Opening the box and seeing it for the first time. I think that, in addition to, when I got to go to Penguin Random House and meet with the team and meet with my editor, and I got to go out to lunch with Sunny Mehta of Knopf and my editor, which was probably one of the best lunches of my life, just because he was such an icon in publishing. And expectations versus reality, I think I'm such a pessimist by nature. I always have low expectations. So anytime something good happens, I think it's thrilling. But when I was writing the book, I was like, this is never going to sell. No one's going to want to read it. So every, step along the way is thrilling, but it's a very different feeling, when it's becoming published than when you're writing it. It's almost a totally separate side of myself, side of the business. For me, writing isn't as glamorous. It's just at home writing and working, and that's actually where I feel the most comfortable.
Hazel,
and I think those lunches and everything, the exciting moments, I think they're hard earned. So I think sometimes we sort of hide when we're writing, so we don't often talk about the graft and the hard work and the doubt. We don't share as much of that outwardly. I think sometimes we sort of pop up at a nice party with a glass of champagne, and people think that's a great life. And it is truly wonderful, but there is a lot of behind the scenes that leads to those exciting, amazing moments. And it never is not exciting. I think opening that box of books and seeing the words there, it's incredible. And then readers reading that and having their own reactions is amazing.
And when I got to go to the bookstore, when I went to when the day my book came out, I went to Book People, which is our local indie bookstore here in Austin, Texas. And I waited until they opened to go in, and I was like, my book's not here. And then I looked to the side, and they had a huge cart, and they were setting it out like right up front. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so that was, and I felt so embarrassed because my husband took a picture of me, and I was like, I don't want to say I'm the author or anything, but they found out anyway.
Okay, so we're running out of time here, so we have time for just one last question, which is always a popular one here. But what advice would you give an aspiring writer trying to get published? So we'll start with Lara, but then Hazel, if you want to jump in on this as well.
I think the number one advice, and advice I'm still trying to follow as I'm working on a new book, is, for me, it's not worrying about perfection on the first draft. It's getting your words and your passion and your ideas and as much as you can down, and knowing that it might not be any good right now. Like, just come to terms with that. Say that's okay. I have multiple revisions, maybe years work ahead of me to make it as perfect as you can make it. And to me, people often will give up because they think, oh, I just can't do it. My writing's so bad. But, looking at 300 filled pages versus the empty page is a boost of confidence, and you feel like you can make something of it. So that's my best advice. Don't give up.
I absolutely agree. I think, I often talk about giving myself permission to write badly in order to discover my story. In the drafting and rewriting, you've got to have something on the page. And I think that's why a lot of books are abandoned, because it's that searching for perfection. And I'm not sure we ever achieve it, but it's learning to write something that you can then work on. The other piece of advice I always give to writers is the 5-minute trick, because I think half the battle is getting yourself in the seat and starting. And once you start writing that scene, that chapter, that session, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour, if you say to yourself, I'm just going to do 5 minutes, you will inevitably still be in the seat 30, 40, 60 minutes later. And that's how you can get words down, because it's finding time. And we all say, oh, I don't have time to write. Yes, you do. It's just starting is the challenge. So that's the other thing I would say as well. And believe in yourself. Have fun. It's great fun. So don't overthink it. It's the best job in the world. So just have fun.
Absolutely.
Now, before we wrap up here, I don't want to embarrass Hazel too much, but can you just give us just a short pitch about your upcoming novel? We just want, while you're here, while our audience is here, they love historical fiction. So tell us about
it. Okay, very quickly. It's definitely my most ambitious historical novel to date. It's set, as we've said, in China in World War II. It starts just after the events of Pearl Harbor. And it's inspired by the most astonishing, incredible true story I discovered through listening to a podcast. And it tells the story of a group of school children and their teachers who together were interned in a Japanese camp during World War II, were separated from their family, from friends, and through this just unimaginable, harrowing set of circumstances, how these bonds of friendship that changed their lives between my main child Nancy and her school teacher Elspeth. And it's really told in a dual point of view between Nancy and Elspeth as to how they cope, how they help each other, and how they endure this incredible moment in their lives. And I think World War II fiction has had a real moment over the last couple of years. But for me, hearing about the war in a different part of the world was so fascinating. And it's a really different set of circumstances. School children who were also Girl Guides in the middle of a war with their teachers was just this. I had to write it. It was just so fascinating to me. And early reaction from readers has been incredible. So I'm very excited for people to read the story in the fall. So thank you for mentioning it.
Yeah, of course. And to viewers out there, pre-order. Find your local indie. You can contact us. We would be happy to take your pre-order.
Yeah, do it.
Let's do.
So it really helps.
Pre-order.
It really helps authors out. Thank you again, Hazel and Lara. This was just a really, really wonderful chat. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you to our viewers. Again, one last push appeal. The secrets we kept. Green button below. Head to our website, midtownscholar.com, and you can order it. Thanks again. Last word, Hazel and Lara. I'll give you the last word. We'll start with Hazel, then we'll let Lara wrap it up.
Just thank you so much. Everybody stay safe, read books, support your local bookstores. My goodness, we need story and escape and fiction more than ever. So just stay safe and keep reading.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I second that. Stay safe and take care of yourselves. Give yourself some time and a lot of care.
All right. Thank you. See everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks so much.